I'm sitting here today in one of my favourite sitting rooms at the south side of Highclere Castle, and my guest for the podcast is the one and only Susie Dent.
Hello.
Susie, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really honoured, and I think everybody knows you, of course, from Countdown and daytime TV, although all your books show such another aspect. But for those of the listeners who live in North America, could you explain a little bit about what Countdown is?
Yes, it is essentially a tea time parlour game. It's very cosy. There's no big money prizes. You win a teapot, a lovely Countdown teapot, but essentially it's a words and numbers game. So contestants have to find their longest words they can out of 9 random letters for the words round, and then there is a maths target that you have to use certain numbers to reach. It's been going for over 40 years now, I think 41 years, and it is I think it's in the Guinness Book of World Records for the quiz show with the most series. But I think maybe some of your listeners will know it from the comedy version, because there is a late night version called 8 out of 10 Cats Just Countdown. There's a long story behind that title, but that is where a group of comedians essentially are the contestants and everything goes very wrong.
But I was reading and I gathered that although Countdown is something you're so renowned from, you never wanted to go on it to start with.
No, totally true. So my trajectory, I suppose, was always going to be staying with books, but flying below the radar, which is usually where I'm most comfortable. And after university, I went to America to study a bit more. In truth, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Loved it there, came back and decided I wanted to work in publishing. So I interviewed for a job at Oxford University Press, who are perhaps best known for publishing the Oxford English Dictionary and a whole range of dictionaries. And I suppose I was there for about a month when one of my bosses, who was the marketing director, said, well, we have this relationship with a program called Countdown, and we send people to be the word referees, and I think you should do it. And I said, oh, thank you, but it's not really for me, because it's the last thing that I wanted to do. I knew the programme, because it had already been going for 10 years by that point. And he left it, but came back, I think it was probably on the 3rd attempt, when he quite strongly said, I think it will be very good for your job if you do this. In other words, you have to do it. And so I went, and I'm actually, he was called Simon. I'm so grateful to Simon for making me do it, because, you know, here I am 31 years later and I'm still doing the same job. And I always say there must be people I was at school with who kind of just switch on the telly one day and think, oh my goodness, she's still doing that job. She's not got very far. But I love it, and I genuinely feel the same adrenaline. Well, not quite the same level of nerves as that first time, but certainly the same adrenaline when the clock, you know, starts ticking down as I did then. And I'm never ever bored, because it's a new challenge. You know, obviously every time you have new contestants, but also word games over and over. And yeah, I love it.
It is amazing. When I love words, and as a writer, I'm always playing with them, although no less about them than you do. But funny enough, I also studied German.
Oh,
and I
wonderful.
studied Middle High German and Anglo-Saxon English.
Oh,
now,
gosh.
I love Anglo-Saxon English.
You will be way better at that than me then. How's your pronunciation? Because mine is a bit dodgy, my old English pronunciation.
Well, actually, nobody can normally criticise me, because nobody
They don't
else.
know.
so if I say, weird has been full arid, as far as anyone's, or Machudas Milzer, then no one's going to say that's... The emphasis is all wrong, because they couldn't say it either. So actually, I'm normally safe in that.
That's good, actually. Just I think I probably wing it too. I have a couple of really good authorities, so when I really need it, there was one word that I use it all the time, and I thought I have to get this right, and it's Uchtkearu. I think it is, and it's mentioned in 1 or 2 texts only, Old English texts, and it means essentially pre-dawn anxiety. So, you know, when you wake up, it's still dark, everything looms so large and disproportionately awfully, and you just think, everything is terrible. It's that kind of morning grief, really, that then dissipates. And Uchtkeari, it's sort of the sorrow of the dawn. Yeah, and it's beautiful, but also reassuring to know that they had it 1,000 years ago too.
I think really reassuring. I think the body of Anglo-Saxon poetry is just extraordinary. And there's another phrase, is it Hironda Handa, when you're just moving your hand through the water to scull.
It's beautiful. And you actually, that just the rhythm of what you said, the way you said it is gorgeous.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I remember only bits and pieces now, but I love the etymology of words, and I've just wrote a blog on Monday about rain.
Oh yeah,
because obviously rain in Anglo-Saxon words somehow sounds much heavier than in the il pleu and the pluvia,
yes,
which comes from the Latin and the showery Southern European side. So I like playing with how that has an effect on us too, because if you say rain today, I think everybody's giving up, because we've never had so much of this really heavy, wet rain, which is very different from the rain, I think, which everyone looks forward to if you live in warmer climes.
That's true. And famously, and I love how this really took off on social media, and it does every year, if we're lucky enough to have a hot, dry spell and then welcome rain, it's petrichor. Have you heard of that? It's the smell of rain hitting scorched earth, and that sort of wonderful musty smell. Apparently it's released by something called geosmin anyway, but two biologists in the 1960s, I think, invented it. And petrichor, the petri bit means stone, and the ichor they took from Greek mythology, and it's the ethereal essence that flows through the veins of the gods, because it's so mystical, and I love that. But weather words are really interesting, because we only use sort of a tiny amount of them, but I think if you look at regional English and our dialect, there are just dozens of words for different kinds of rain, where it's hadder, which I think they have in Scotland, which is that really fine drizzle, a bit like heather. I think it comes from heather, in fact. Or, the Scots have dree, famously, and that kind of thing. And one of my favourites is from Scots, and it definitely applies to now, and it's flenched. And when weather is flenched, it looks like it kind of gives a deceitful promise of improvement, but that never comes. So it looks like it's going to get better, but then it never actually does.
I think that's where we are at the moment. It looks like it's going to get better.
At time, and then, it's freezing.
But I look at MetCheck and think, oh my God, it's going. I've looked at several weather forecasts just before coming across, which is what I was dilly-dallying doing, because it was so annoying. Everything looked as if it was going the wrong way, which is a bit boring. I also studied a little bit of linguistics, because I found it was about, how the thought and the word and speech and what came in what order. And it was always going back to the fact that an Eskimo, for example, would have many more words for snow, because there were many more different sorts of snow in their life. Yeah. Whereas we just have snow today.
Wow, you
but
say
we don't.
That.
I was waiting for you to tell me that.
No, there's a whole body of kind of discussions about this, because it is very likely that the Scots actually have more words for snow than the Inuit do. Some of them are wonderful, like flindrikin, which is a tiny, I think it's one single particle of snow, and then flother, which is to snow very gently with the promise of more to come. And there's loads of them. And unsurprisingly, because Scots is as far north as Moscow, I think, and so it's unsurprising that they have so many words for snow. And there's that also the very big question with language, which is whether our words influence us, or whether we then influence the words, or the words come from us. So linguistic determinism and that kind of thing, which is really interesting. But you probably know more about linguistics than I do, because I always veer towards the stories rather than the mechanics of things. I think that's where the romance was for me, in all these secret lives that kind of lie within the pages of the dictionary, and some of them have just forgotten, and that was what my eye was always drawn to, and my heart, I think.
I think I'm drawn here to often the names of the places in the landscape, because I find that very important. There's an Anglo-Saxon charter dated to 749 AD relating to Highclere. So it's telling the story of the bounds of the estate according to the landscape. And the words are so interesting. Yeah. It's obviously there's some obvious words like Hunigveg, the honey way, or Withigraphus, which is towards the graves, the tumulus. Reverend Dunlop had translated that, a Victorian translated of Anglo-Saxon, as towards groves of trees, which it clearly wasn't, because you would never mark an estate by a grove of tree which comes and goes.
Yeah.
But Graf, obviously, in German is the same word as grave, so we've got some Bronze Age tumuli here, so I think that's how it's measured. And the top of what we call Beacon Hill was Weald Settle. Now, I love that Weald Weld settlement, chieftain and settled settlement.
There's so many place names are named after the person who established them. And
exactly, and after the community, effectively, there. So it's so interesting how you can gather them together as well.
Yeah.
And you were writing about pub names, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
pub names and nursery rhymes.
So interesting.
They are, and sometimes you think, oh, that's got to be apocryphal, and I think it really isn't. And then there are other times. I mean, I think they all invite different interpretations, but some of them are more obvious. The King's Arms, obviously, or the Saracen's Head, or whatever.
You didn't actually pick up the Green Man. There's quite a lot of green men. So I was looking down.
Yeah,
and it's just because I carved a tree into a green man on the way up the drive here.
Oh, how
because
fantastic.
it was a cedar tree which had come down, Susie. So we left the stump and it was standing there, and I was wondering about it, and neither Georgia nor I wanted to cut it down. So I then found an amazing wood sculptor who I knew, and he carved a green man coming out of the ground and into it. So it's the height of the ceiling with leaves coming down from the top, which is just blooming magical.
It won't ever recover. Is it just
the tree? No, it fell down.
It literally fell.
It did.
Oh, that's so sad.
It was huge, and it's the height of the coving in this room, the trunk, which is fantastic left. So we took it down to that level.
I'm such a tree lover, or what they say, dendrophile. I'm at my happiest with trees, and I've always loved the fact that tree and true are probably siblings if you take them all the way back to the ancient roots. And lexicographers talk about the roots of words, and I always think there's a lovely poetry there when it comes to how things grow, and that sort of, the branches of family trees in language as well. So that's gorgeous. That's a really lovely thing to do. And cedar's actually my favourite tree.
I think the words are a pointer to the values of the past, which we tend to forget if we don't know where they came from. So I was very lucky. I did Latin from the age of 4 or 5. I went to an old-fashioned school, and it was just so interesting again, because it makes you learn things by rote, because you don't know how it works otherwise. Yeah. But it also, this gives you a different dimension in terms of how you're forming the words and the importance of speech, and when you're creating a speech and the form of it, which was highly commended by those who did it well. It was extraordinary.
And also spotting the connections between languages as well. I think that's completely fascinating, and why they differ. And you were saying about rain, we have the Germanic rain and the German Regen, and then they have pleuvoir, which just sounds beautiful, doesn't it? But just, as you say, not quite
lighter, like a shower.
Yeah.
Which is rather the incessant rain here.
That's the kind of thing, when I was little, I would just get completely lost in the back of the car. So we'd go on these family trips, and I would love reading what the French for an umbrella was, for example, or, I don't know why, it just pleased me so much, and I've never quite understood why, but I maybe shouldn't analyse it too much.
So have you been mad about words from as long as you can remember? Was that what caught you?
Yes, genuinely. I was remembering today, because the anniversary of my dad's death, sadly, is coming up, and he always said, you should write fictional, you should write short stories or whatever. And when I was about 8 or 9, I wrote this very breathless piece for the school magazine about being chased through a wood, a very misty wood, and it was called Pursuit, I think. And so he was really keen that I kept doing that. But then I think I just discovered dictionaries, and there was, didn't need any drama with those. There were just so many stories in them, and vocabulary books as well. I would have a German vocab book. I was such a geek, honestly. I still am. But I would have a French vocabulary book and a German vocabulary book, and I would just be lost. It was a bit, I suppose, in a way, a bit like a thematic phrase book. I'd go to the beach one day and I'd learn everything from the beach. And it sounds so boring and dry, but actually I just loved it. It was my oasis. My sister was very normal and would be doing all the things that a teenager should do, like, getting eyelash colours and makeup and stuff. But I was just face down in these books, and not much has changed since, to be fair.
Did you study modern languages then? Or?
Yeah, so at university it was French and German for me, and then I went to the States, as I say, just to study a little bit more, and then German was the main thing there. And so English, and especially English etymology, I only came to quite late when I was already working at OUP, and I just found some really old etymological dictionaries, and that was it. Yeah, I just got lost in those.
I loved some of the words. Is it this book actually? The Roots of Happiness. That's such a charming book. That sounds patronising. I don't mean it to be,
no,
but like the word charm, or one word in there which I love is full bliss.
Oh, isn't it beautiful?
It is so beautiful.
Yeah, centuries ago, they used to put for in front of so many things to express the kind of state of being in a certain way. I think one of my for bliss is beautiful, so just rendered so happy. And but they also had for swunk, which is exhausted from too much work, and sometimes
definitely that's me.
Many of us. And sometimes I put the E in it, so it's FORE swunk, which I think means exhausted before you even begin, which is me as well. But if you look in the for the for bit of the Oxford English Dictionary, there are just so many adjectives like full blissed. It's lovely. But thank you for saying that, because that was aimed very much at children as a reminder that for all the negative words we use, and there are so many of them, there are actually so many positives that we tend to forget.
And it's just so charming. It really is. And
well, the illustrations, which are obviously not mine, someone called Harriet Hobday, who's wonderful. I think she's really made the book and the words come alive.
They are so sweet. And I also, I think darling is I think darling is an Anglo-Saxon word.
Yeah.
Dearling.
Dearling, yes, little dear.
Dearling. And and my husband sometimes calls me darling, otherwise sweetie, which I suspect is, that's Zeus and sweet, isn't it? I imagine all the German words.
Yeah, Süßling they have, don't they? And Süßchen as well in German.
We've got some great Austrian friends, and they use Liebling and things like that as well.
Yeah.
So it's
that little diminutive, which somehow isn't patronising. It's just, I suppose we have things like poppet, don't we? And which also is like a little person. So perhaps they're applied to children and then sort of transferred to the people that we love. But we used to have really weird names to call our, partner or our beloved. Like, well, there's prawn and cabbage and bag pudding, which is really my little bag pudding. I'm not sure I'd like that one.
What's cabbage in German? Because that's used more often.
Kohl, isn't it? Kohl, K-O-H-L.
Kohl. There's a little chou-fleur. I was thinking.
Exactly. My little cauliflower. I suppose that's just as bad.
One petit chou-fleur.
Yeah, exactly. And pig's eye was another one. So pig's knee, it was, which was essentially saying my pig's eye, which is not very nice. And bully. So Shakespeare used bully in a kind, affectionate way. So there's bully bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream. And it comes from a Dutch word meaning lover. So it was actually a really positive word. But then it was applied to somebody who was so admired and loved that they were a bit swaggering with it, and then they became quite nasty at the end. See, this is an example of how it's so often in English things take a dive. So they start out positively and then they end up,
Which is quite sad. I think, Shakespeare, I'm definitely guilty of idolatry. And I think his use of language and words and the rhythm, and if he didn't have it, he just made it up anyway, didn't he? And I love that, because in Anglo-Saxon as well, words move and change, and the spelling was less rigid than perhaps we have today. And I like that flexibility, because we have to be flexible in life, but you equally well, I think, sometimes need the rules in order to understand how you're then using the rules to go your own way.
Them. Yeah, that's very true. And Shakespeare was really criticised at the time for mucking around with language. A lot of his critics, or a lot of his contemporaries, didn't like him using words like laughable, because they said it should be laugh-atable. And I always remember that when someone says, that's very relatable, and I want to say relatable too. Or, I don't know, somehow relatable doesn't sound quite right to me. But of course, there's the big question, because he is the bedrock of the historical Oxford English Dictionary, which is the sort of mother of all dictionaries. It's just so amazing. But he's credited with so many first records. But as time goes on, we are discovering what we call antedating, so earlier uses of particular words, which he then picked up because they were out there. He was tuning in, he was listening, and we think possibly a lot of them came from women as well, whose voices weren't recorded so much. So it's really fascinating. But there's no doubt that he was such an exuberant experimenter with words, and he flipped verbs into nouns, and again, a lot of people don't like that these days, or nouns into verbs, that kind of thing. But he just had this joy with handling words and shifting them around and holding them up in different lights. Yeah, he was incredible.
We've got a beautiful collection of Shakespeare by Alexander Pope, Pope's collection of Shakespeare in the library, which I was looking at, given that Shakespeare's birth and death is supposedly the 23rd of April.
Yes.
And looking through some of those lines that he wrote. But I also wanted to mention that in the dining room here, there's a portrait of W.H. William Herbert, to whom he possibly dedicated many of his plays, who was a patron. So it's quite fun to share that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just extraordinary.
And
they use in Pope the old-fashioned S, the German S, and the different F. I've forgotten what they're called now. I'm being completely stupid.
So they used to have the S set, didn't they? Which
yes,
is
when you write Strasse with a B, what do you call that?
So that is S set. S set.
Is it S set? Okay.
I think. Is that so? As it STRA, it looks like a B, doesn't it? Yeah, I think that's the S
or whatever it is.
Which they've got rid of now. So in modern German orthography, it's really interesting because a lot of people say, we need firm linguistic government for English. It's going to the dogs. It's just chaotic and anarchic, and it's never going to recover. We've always thought the golden age was in the past, always. So again, as I say, in Shakespeare's time, people thought, what's going to happen? It's just going to fall apart. But in other countries like France, famously, they do have an academy and they do try and impose a rule. And in Germany, it was a decision quite a few years ago now to change all school books and all dictionaries and get rid of that S set and replace it with double S. So you won't find that in modern German texts anymore. But that's what I learned at school, so I quite liked it.
Yes, I still use it if I'm writing a few words.
Yeah.
But how extraordinary. Well, that passed me by clearly as the news.
Well, it's totally fine, and it would still be comprehensible. I think it's just in official documents; it's not used anymore. I think.
Fair enough. But in Anglo-Saxon, there's quite a few. There's a th, which is written very different. The song, and I can't seem to remember all the words that I should to describe the different letters of the alphabet. But I find Anglo-Saxon very, very beautiful. So I'm afraid I read Bosworth Toller's Anglo-Saxon Dictionary in the bath.
Oh, you see,
so that's what I really like.
I read dictionaries of etymology, so your Anglo-Saxon honestly would be
that's
wonderful.
Completely fine. And I have also studied hieroglyphics as well, which I have loved. High Egyptian hieroglyphics through Alan Gardner's great grammar works and dictionaries, which is phenomenal. I mean, I find it so relaxing. It just takes my brain away.
See, they are oases. I don't know what the plural of oasis is. I should know. Oases. Aren't they? They're just these places to escape to. So I remember during the pandemic, I was reading the OED more and more and more because it was just there and it felt really safe, but thrilling as well.
Did you film Countdown at all or do any TV?
We stopped for a little while actually and then came in, but they made the desk a lot wider, and until quite recently actually on the comedy version of Countdown they had glass partitions between various people. So they had a whole load of safety protocols, but that was quite a strange time, but also for the lucky ones amongst us it was quite a lovely time, wasn't it, just to stop and think and maybe spend time with family. But I know so many people did not have that luxury. So, and the weather was beautiful as well, I think. So there was that sort of brief moment where you just thought, actually, this is okay. And then I think all the worries for everybody set in, and obviously, a lot of tragedy happened too.
So what was the word
Utkearu.
Utkearu.
Yeah, so it's UHT. So if you'll be able to tell me better than this, I think it's a bit like the in loch. Ucht, I think. So it's quite Germanic. And then Cearu.
Uchtkearu.
I think, but you will probably pronounce it better than me. But yeah, there was lots of that
Yes.
I think, during that time. But yeah, I'm like you. I will happily read a dictionary in the bath, in bed.
Well, my husband honestly thinks I'm completely mad.
No,
But that's that. I think he's given up, actually.
I'm sure that was part of the reason why he loves you, because I love how, in my lifetime anyway, words like geek have come full circle. Well, not full circle, actually, because it started off being really not particularly nice. So geek is from a dialect word geck, meaning a fool. And the original gecks or geeks would perform at freak shows up and down the country, and they would do these really extreme acts like biting the heads off live chickens and things. Awful, absolutely awful. But they were extreme. That was the idea. And so when somebody became obsessive about a particular subject or, knowledge or whatever, it was applied to them as well. But now it's cool to be a geek. I'm not sure it's cool to be a swat, which I definitely think I would have been called at school, because that's a variation on sweat. I think it's never going to be good. And nerd was, I think, one of the earliest mentions is in Dr. Zeus, if I ran the zoo, and it's a kind of weird looking animal. But I do like the fact that people who enjoy having a depth of knowledge in one particular area now celebrated rather than mocked, for the most part anyway.
Yes.
So I think it's very cool that you're reading.
Yes, well, thank you very much. You're one of the rare people who probably does. But anyway,
we are sisters in that.
I simply adore it. I really do. That's what I turn to escape some of the everyday challenges that I'm often facing here, actually. So can I ask you, you've written so many books. Do you have another book on the go at the moment? Where are you going to move to next with your writing?
Well, I have another of the children's books coming, which will be nice. But
Is this for child? I think it's for me.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. Well, it was aimed at children. It was aimed...
I'm squeaking. I think it's just absolutely lovely.
Yeah, it was really aimed... what set it off was something I bang on about all the time, which is a mission to bring back the lost positives of words like, we're disgruntled and dishevelled and unwieldy and uncouth and unkempt, and ruthless and feckless and things, that the positive counterparts actually existed. And you could be feckful if you were full of affect, and you could be ruthful if you were full of ruth or compassion. You could be gruntled, thanks to P.G. Wodehouse. And you could
love P.G. Wodehouse.
Gormful as well as gormless. So it was that's how it started off, which was essentially the message. Hang on, there are so many lovely ones.
There are.
Which we should bring back. Why are we brooding on the negatives? And so it was a kind of clarion call really for children to kind of carry that torch forward, and then if it appeals to adults as well, then that's great. But it's a really lovely thing to write. So I have another one of those, and I have another non-fiction book in my head, but also a bit of fiction as well. So lots of different things. But writing is, you will know, it's so hard to get to sometimes. But when you do get to it, it's the only place you want to be. But it gets crowded out that time so often by everything else, and you must find that more than anyone. Yeah.
Where do you write?
I write in the same place that Giles Brandreth and I do our podcast from. We used to sit together in my house actually, but now we're on Zoom, and it still feels quite a sort of good, quite intimate space to talk to each other in, because you can see each other and you can hear each other really well thanks to modern tech. So I'm in my study, surrounded by both quite a few dictionaries, but also some strange props from the 8 out of 10 Cats Just Countdown studio, and a lot of light. It's a very small room, and I just have a big screen in front of me. So, do you write longhand? No. I do sometimes write longhand, and I think the result is better, but I just don't have time to write anything longhand.
I have notebooks.
Yeah.
And if I'm thinking of things, I tend to write. I like forming the words.
Yes.
But then I write on a computer because it's just, I'm usually, I don't want to lose things.
Yes, that's a very good point. You've got to back up. Which is
not so good. Having said that, my last book was about the Earl and the Pharaoh, Tutankhamun, the discovery of Tutankhamun, and kind of obviously set at Downton Abbey, which is where the Fifth Earl's home was.
Yeah.
But what I had found to my joy was I had a notebook from a trip down the Nile I'd done probably 2011. And I still had the notebook with all my thoughts written in longhand.
So
and when you
about it.
touch it and find it, which was such a happy making moment, I can still think of it. And you turn the pages and you see your writing. It's wonderfully reassuring. So I like those around me. And then I like notebooks. I love stationery. But then I've got a room at the top here, which is... I've painted the colour of yellow like Egypt with sort of teal-coloured cupboards and things.
Well, that sounds gorgeous.
And I've got a CD player I bought from Argos ages ago. And I like putting the music in there and choosing John Rutter or Mozart or Handel.
Yeah.
And then that music I find unbelievably helpful. I don't want anything stressful.
No.
I want something which... For somehow, I think classical music, to my mind, enters the brain almost like words of a dictionary, and it sort of whirls around there and helps you reconnect.
Do you not find that your writing style changes? Like if there's a sudden flourish or something, you start... That's my worry if I have music, because I'm always astounded by how kids these days will do all their homework with their headphones on, with music on. I can't, for me, that's just two different spheres.
I don't like that at all, because I like the music in the room.
Yeah.
And it's the things that I know, so I know the rhythms of it.
Okay.
And I end up starting to tune out or not.
Yes. So there's a predictability about it.
There is a cadence about it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a cadence and rhythm to what you write and the paragraphs as you write them. I hope, got a little bit better over my trials and tribulations. And I can kind of feel that. And I know if I'm going into a sadder bit, I'm going to reflect that in the music I put on and just...
So do you find that the when you know what mood is going to come from your pen, so to speak, do you put the music on to match that, or do you put the music on and then your writing sort of moves in that direction?
I don't really know. I think because I don't know. Do you write consecutively, Susie?
In terms of
writing one chapter and the next and the next?
No, I wish I could.
You see, I don't either. I think it's a jigsaw puzzle where I've got an idea of the cover.
Yes.
But I write in splodges of colour.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, like a collage. I see what you mean now. I was thinking you meant in terms of time, just sort of letting it all flow. Day after day, because I wish I could do that, but I can't.
I don't do that either. I don't have the time to do that.
No, it's really interesting because I'm writing a Radio 4 drama with a friend, just a single afternoon drama with a friend at the moment, which I've never done before, and it's a lovely thing to do. And for the first time ever, that's exactly how it's being approached. So we're putting together lots of scenes and then seeing where they kind of fit in, which is quite exciting, but a little bit unnerving as well. But do you always know where you're going to end up then?
Because I have been writing non-fiction.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of course, you do.
But I don't know the path by which I get there.
No.
So when I wrote The Earl and the Pharaoh, I found I knew where I was starting, which I knew that one very clearly.
Yeah.
And then the next chapter actually became more Jeeves and Worcester, because my research led me to the fact that the fifth Earl of Carnarvon was actually... didn't do very well at school and was asked to leave Eton. and you get things like that and you think, okay, unexpected. This isn't the traditional route to finishing your school. And
but then you're going to follow it.
But then it begins, then you follow it, and you're in the relationship between any parent and child of trying to get the child to read, to listen, to learn, and clearly it wasn't going to be in the classroom.
No.
So I found it really interesting.
Yeah.
So yes, you the splodges become slightly differently shaped, if you like.
But it's nice, and then you can rearrange them, which is lovely. So I do like that idea, but I wonder if the geek in me likes to follow a structure, but then I'm not particularly disciplined. If I'm writing an article for a newspaper, I don't map it out first. I don't say I'm going to go here, 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 and here, which is what you're supposed to do.
I have a deadline.
Exactly.
So I just find
dive in.
And with my blogs, because that's sort of 700 words every Monday, and I just think, okay,
that's a lot.
It's Sunday, I've got to write it. Well, I try to write them ahead, but again, it's those are slightly different. And I've been sometimes asking. I'm just deciding whether to write for a magazine in America, which is quite a lot of words. And when I started writing the odd magazines, I'm sure you know, they paid you whatever it's 90 pence a word or something very exciting.
Yeah.
And then it went down and down and down, and then you're lucky to be asked to do it at all. And I'm just deciding where I am with that luckiness.
Yeah, maybe you want that weekly pressure. But then there's just, I think the favourite bit for me of the entire writing process is the editing. And so many people have said to me, especially with fiction, just get down the first draft. It doesn't matter how bad it is, and then go back to it and reshape. And that is, I think, my favourite bit. It's finessing. It's finding the right word. I mean, finessing is far less superficial than that, because sometimes I just chuck out what I've written. But
so where does the word finesse come from then? Do you know?
French, and I guess it's something fine and sort of sophisticated, and so the two senses of fine as in very, very sort of narrow, if you think about fine print, and fine as in nice, good, go together, I suppose, in terms of admiring something quite sophisticated and elegant, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and I quite like the shaping. I will sometimes just think, I've got to write something.
Yeah, and I think
and I don't mind
help.
that at all. Then you edit it. Then it becomes. Sometimes it's really exciting because you find what you didn't know you had.
Yes,
Yes,
and I don't know about you, but I'm so used to the experience of reading back over something I wrote ages ago and thinking, how did I ever write that? But just occasionally, you come across a sentence and you think, wow. Did I actually write that? And you're quite proud of yourself, and then you think, I wouldn't be able to do that again. So it's that constant self-doubt and self-edit. And that is why I prefer doing longhand if I get the chance, which, as I say, is quite rare, because you don't self-edit. You just go for it. And I think your thoughts then are far more fluid and fluent, in my case anyway. And you can edit afterwards. But I think on the computer, I'm looking up at it all the time, and then I'm backspacing, deleting and things, and it just becomes...
Because I've got another thing which I use, so I'm writing by longhand, because I've got another little project which is more about drama and, writing what people say. And if I write it by longhand, I've got a thing on my phone where I can then read what I've written longhand.
And scan it.
And then it translates it into words.
This is what I need.
And then I email it to myself, which is a bit long-winded, but it means I don't have to mistype it again.
So what are you writing it on then, longhand?
If I'm writing on a notepad or paper.
And is it with a sort of one kind of electronic pen? No.
Then I read what I've written.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be said anyway.
Okay.
So I'm writing it in longhand, he said to her, whatever else.
I see.
And then I read it out to myself.
And then it translates onto the...
Then it translates it. And then I found that quite useful.
I find that, I don't know, maybe it's my voice, but I find when I try and dictate to my phone, it comes out with absolute...
Gobbledygook.
Yeah. And I get really frustrated because I end up just having to correct most of it anyway. But hopefully voice recognition will become much more sophisticated, and we can all do that.
I start speaking more clearly, because otherwise I'm going to have to retype the bloody thing.
Yes, which you really don't want to do. But I think there are, just getting down to the basics, but I think there are now things where you can write as though with a pen, so it's like an electronic stylus, and it will then just come out on the... You can write on paper, but
pencils and pens. I've just bought myself a new fountain pen.
I'm so with you on stationery. I used to get so excited about going to buy stationery when I was little, and that's never quite gone away.
No, I completely agree with you.
Yeah. So
we sell stationery in our gift shop, so make sure I've always got a supply if I want it.
Oh, that's good. So
it's really nice.
That's brilliant.
It's really not very fair at all. But thank you, Susie, so much for coming along today.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been such a joy. I think the book's The Roots of Happiness for grown-up children as well as children.
Yes.
Although I'm not sure I'm very grown up, actually, but anyway.
Well, I look at the illustrations sometimes myself, and they do calm you down. And there's a tree on the front. What more can you want?
I'm nothing at all. I love trees. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why not join me to enjoy a plethora of fascinating topics, guests and friends from the world of Highclere Castle, the real Downton Abbey. Whether you love movies or care about the planet, wish to discover the best gardening or cooking tips, hear about innovation, music, or the history of flight, I hope you will thoroughly enjoy the library we have created on my podcast page at ladycarnarvon.com.